Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Global Apparel Production and Fashion Business Session, and I'm Yoon-Jung Lee at Korea University, the moderator of the session. In this session, we will have 3 presentations, and through these presentations, we would like to focus on the need for workforce development for the future of Myanmar fashion or apparel industry. First, I'm going to talk about the roles of textiles and apparel industries and the economical development to lay out the general background for today's session. And after my presentation, Dr. Jaeil at Seattle Pacific University will give a presentation entitled Fashion Industry, Education, and Business in Myanmar to talk about the Myanmar context. And then Dr. Ellie at North Carolina State University will speak about the apparel industry development in a nation. How can we prepare? And each of the presentation is about 20 to 30 minutes. And after the presentations, we will take some time for a general discussion. So let me start with my presentation. Again, the title is The Roles of Textiles and Apparel Industries in the Economic Development, and my name is Yoon-Jung Lee. I'm at the Department of Home Economics Education at Korea University. From the global value chain perspective, the apparel industry is a buyer-driven commodity chain as opposed to producer-driven commodity chain. According to Jaeil, in a buyer-driven chain, the global buyers determine what is to be produced, where, by whom, and at what price, and they play a major role in setting up the production networks in a variety of exporting countries. And usually, the profits come from combinations of high-value research, design, sales, marketing, and financial services. In this kind of an industry, management of the supply chain is one of the keys to success for the retailers. This slide shows how the apparel value chain is composed of. The global apparel value chain comprises 4 constituent networks. And first, the component networks are composed of textile mills or providers of the raw materials for apparel products. Second, the production networks include apparel manufacturers that develop fashion products, as well as garment factories, contractors, and subcontractors. And third, export networks. It includes companies like apparel brands or their buying offices and trading companies. And finally, marketing networks include retail outlets like department stores or specialty stores. And here we may need to note that the textile industry is technology and capital intensive, and the retail industry is knowledge and information driven, while the apparel industry, the production networks, particularly the garment assembly part, is very labor intensive. So for this reason, many developing countries start their economic development with garment production. Garment production is labor intensive and the skill level required is relatively low. As the countries acquire more capital, they will go into more capital or knowledge intensive business such as textile production or apparel development. But at more advanced stages of economy, they will lose competitiveness in garment production, so the apparel industry usually declines. In other words, some form of international division of labor occurs. So you can somehow estimate the stage of economic and industrial development of a nation by the stage of textile and apparel industries the nation is at. According to Rostow's theory of economic development, a country's economic development go through these stages of growth, from the traditional society via take-off stage, drive to maturity stage, and finally to high mass consumption stage. And the stages of apparel industry development go almost parallel to the stages of economic growth. At the embryonic stage of textile and apparel development, most apparel production is for domestic consumption, and simple handmade fabrics from natural fiber may be produced. And at the early export stage, Low-wage labor is used in labor-intensive operations like assembly of garment parts, ethnic clothing, or products with extensive handwork, like hand weaving or embroidery. And at this stage, price is the primary appeal, and quality is usually unpredictable. At more advanced production stage, fabric production usually improves, and some manufactured fibers may be produced. Apparel production is expanded and upgraded. The firms may gain assistance by larger manufacturers and retailers in more developed countries. Government policies foster consumption of domestic products. In other words, import substitution occurs and exports are increased. At the Golden Age stage, sophisticated apparel and textile production is possible. Large trade surpluses occur, and the country becomes a powerful force in international markets. But their share in the national economy will shrink as other industries also develop, and less attention from their own government will happen. And at the full maturity stage, total output may continue to increase, but employment in textile and apparel complex declines, particularly in apparel sector, and the industry becomes more concentrated. Finally, a significant decline happens, particularly in garment production, and many of the apparel factories will move offshore and trade deficits occur. The survival pattern differs by country, but most of the high mass consumption economies are at the 5th or 6th stage in this development curve. There is a model of economic growth that explains about how this international division of labor occurred, which is called the flying geese model. The flying geese model asserts that the nations gradually move up in technological development by following the pattern of nations ahead of them in the development process. For example, Korea and Taiwan follow the pattern of Japan, from textiles, chemicals to automobiles and electronic industries. And Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia followed Korea and Taiwan's pattern. This cycle is made possible through diversification, and each nation focuses on the industry in which they have comparative advantages. The diversification may occur in two patterns: intra-industry cycle and inter-industry cycle. In the inter-industry cycle, it represents the development of a new industry, as is shown in this figure, from textiles to electronic industries. Another pattern is intra-industry cycle, created by the emergence of new products within an existing industry, for example, textiles and apparel industry. This type of diversification allows upgrading of the industry into a new level of sophistication and participation in functions that can generate higher added values. And we will focus on this intra-industry cycle of diversification. About the functions of apparel value chain and the values added by each function, Frederick identified 7 distinct functions: R&D, design, purchasing, or sourcing. This involves inbound flow of materials, production, assembly, or cut, make, and trim, distribution, or outbound flow of products, marketing and sales, and finally services. And here, the function in the middle, which is production, is related to the lowest added value, while the value added will increase as you move either side. Economic upgrading may occur depending on what functions they perform in the global value chain. And there are several different ways that firms can participate in the global value chain. They usually enter into the value chain via assembly or CMT, with the lowest added value, and then they will participate in OEM, ODM, OBM by performing more sophisticated functions, and the upgrading may happen in terms of either product or process. Now we're going to examine each of these upgrading options one by one. First, entry into the chain via assembly or CMT. Here, CMT stands for cut, make, and trim. This is the most basic stage of the apparel industry. The focus of supplier or the manufacturer is on production alone. The supplier is responsible for cutting, sewing, supplying trim, and or shipping the ready-made garment. And the buyer will provide fabrics along with detailed manufacturing specification. And the inputs like textiles, accessories, and packaging may be imported because the local options are of limited availability or inadequate quality, and product focus may be relatively narrow. And second is the original equipment manufacturing or full package service. In this case, the apparel manufacturer takes on a broader range of functions as well as production. The firm will take charge of sourcing input, so they need to have the ability to procure and finance the materials for production. And sometimes the firms is responsible for downstream logistics like packaging and shipping the final products to the buyer at an agreed selling price. And this activity or pricing is referred to as FOB or free on board. The buyer typically provides the product specification and designs, but they do not provide a very detailed design, specification as in the CMT case. And the supplier are in charge of the details of the manufacturing process, such as pattern making. So full package firms source their materials from local industry. So this can provide important backward linkage to the domestic textile industry. And many countries begin textile production by manufacturing textiles to be used in their apparel exports. Third option is the original development manufacturing or full package service with design. The supplier will perform design, fabric purchasing, cutting, sewing, trimming, packaging, and distribution. In other words, all steps involved in the production. And many private label retail buyers utilize this option. In original brand manufacturing, supplier acquires post-production capabilities such as marketing and branding, and upgrading involves move into the sale of own brand products. Many firms in developing countries enter OBM with brand development for products sold in their domestic or neighboring country markets. It should also be noted that product and process upgrading in a country can be very important for driving growth in the industry. Product upgrading involves an increased unit value by producing more complex products, which requires increasing the capabilities of the firm. Countries must move from low-cost commodities to high-value added fashion goods that warrant higher returns as labor rates increase. On the other hand, process upgrade include upgrading activity that improves efficiency and flexibility by improving production methods through adoption of new machinery or technology. And for process upgrading, capital investment is needed, and workers also need to be trained. But it will be beneficial for both the firm and the chain because it reduces the total time cost and increases the flexibility of the supply chain process. The flying geese model may be considered a part of modernization theories of economic growth. And these theories, these modernization theories, are criticized because they assume more developed countries are a model or an ideal that all the less developed countries should emulate. And the growth occurs from one stage to the next. And also it is considered ethnocentric. Particularly the flying geese model is criticized that it reflects the Japanese view to the economic development of Pacific Asia. Another criticism is that the gap between poorer and richer countries persists. First, the more developed countries are reluctant to transfer their technology to other nations, and second, because the structural relations among nations or the structural factors within some underdeveloped countries an inhibiting role. So some countries are stuck in the low level of development, no matter how hard they try. And the third criticism is that there is no consideration of change in the environment, in the global economic environment. There actually are a lot of changes happening, and so the flying geese model failed to explain the different development patterns in the Southeast Asian countries and the East Asian countries. So as a conclusion, considering all these, what we're proposing to newcomers in the industry like Myanmar is that as they become a part of this global value chain, they should consider what kind of new competitive advantage they will have to support further growth. They should note that the industry atmosphere has changed, and there's a universal demand on sustainable supply chain. The factories should comply to the leading companies' code of conduct, which includes decent working condition and consideration to workers' health and safety, transparency, and compliance issues. So, and also they should consider the environmental sustainability, and because many of the leading firms are seeking for the ways that they can realize a circular economy by reducing the input of virgin raw materials. So the apparel firms in developing countries need to take care of the sustainability issues. At the same time, they are seeking out new sources of competitive advantages. Some examples of competitive advantage might include increased productivity through automation, with an emphasis on high-performance work arrangements associated with lean manufacturing and modular production. And all in all, we suggest that a very highly sophisticated education and workforce development are needed to develop a workforce that has understanding of all these issues and have the capability to establish new comparative advantages for sustainable development. So this concludes my presentation, and I'm going to pass on my mic and the camera to Dr. Jaeil. Thank you for listening.
Hello everyone, I am Jaeil from Seattle Pacific University in Seattle, Washington. I'm a professor and program chair of apparel design and merchandising. I had a great privilege to visit and spend time in Myanmar from the year of 2018 to 2019 as a U.S. Fulbright Scholar. What I'm going to talk about today is fashion industry, fashion education, and fashion business in Myanmar. First, let me talk about fashion industry in Myanmar. I want to specifically talk about fashion manufacturing in Myanmar. Before we move into more about the fashion industry and fashion manufacturing in Myanmar, let me briefly talk about macroeconomic overview of Myanmar. Myanmar is the second largest country in Southeast Asia in terms of land area, land size. And in terms of population, with a size of 53 million as of 2019, and it is estimated to grow to 54.7 million by 2024. And Myanmar is expected to have the highest GDP growth rate at 6.8% until 2024 among the ASEAN countries. And it plays a significant role in the region. And on your right side, there's a chart, and you can clearly compare with other countries in the same region of Southeast Asia. And Myanmar is really standing out, and it has whopping 6.8% of expectation of growth rate compared to other countries. And as you can see, Vietnam is 6.6 and Laos is 6.7%. Garment manufacturing plays a really important role in Myanmar. especially when the wages are comparatively lower than in other regional production hubs in Southeast Asia, and also the generalized system of preferences, we call it GSP, grant duty-free exports to Europe. And lastly, beneficial trade agreements between Myanmar and other countries were available. So that's the reason the export value of garments increased from USD $900 million in 2012 to USD $4.6 billion in 2018. And let me briefly talk about the location of garment factories. Most of the garment factories operated in the Yangon region, according to the Myanmar Garment Manufacturers Association, MGMA. As we can see, half of the existing garment factories are located in Yangon. And the location is primarily in the Hleing, Tayar industrial zone, or located across the townships on the outskirts of Yangon, with some additional newly established production sites in the Tilawa Special Economic Zone. And also, other key locations outside of the Yangon are predominantly Bago, Pathin, Pan, and Mandalay. And as you can see in the maps, we can see the little bullet points to specify the locations. The slide shows the total number of garment factories and market focus in Myanmar. According to Myanmar Garments Manufacturers Association, in the year of 2012, there were 200 manufacturing factories located in Myanmar. But the number was increased dramatically in the year of 2018. The total number of 553 manufacturing factories located in Myanmar. The garment manufacturing industry in Myanmar is dominated by export-oriented factories, all operating under the Cut, Make, Pack CMP system, with the bulk of raw materials being imported. It means labor-focused cut, make, trim process is done in Myanmar, but acquiring fabric, design development, and more sophisticated process are done by overseas headquarters of the retailers or manufacturers of the product. And they put the orders to the factories in Myanmar. Interestingly enough, out of 533 garment factories registered in Myanmar, over 90% of which primarily focus on the export market, and only 10% is focused on local market. With a population of 53 million, the local market is also large enough for ready-to-wear garment factories to tap into. However, considering the current status, due to a lower disposable income, especially for clothing, the local demand is primarily met by tailors operating small shops in residential areas in their vicinity. As the GDP goes up, I'm sure that the demand for ready-to-wear fashion products will go up in the future. It means there is a bright spot of Myanmar fashion industry because try to provide more products for the local market will create more revenues for the fashion industry. CMP versus FOB. CMP means cut, make, pack, or we can also call it cut, make, trim, versus FOB, free on board, parenthesis, full package, parenthesis, FP. So the garment production processes start from develop design, purchase fabric and accessory and other raw materials, and also cut, make the garment trim and pack the garments, and ship the garments. So FOB includes the whole process of production, but CMP mainly includes cut, make, trim. It means the design process, sourcing the raw materials, and also banking support to buy and to prepare for the process. They are included in FOB, but cut, make, package or cut, make, trim only includes just a labor-focused process. So we'll talk more about this later in the presentation, but as you can see, this is clearly different to CMP and FOB. This slide shows the share of garment exports by country. The record is for 2018. As you can see, each country is color-coded, and as you can see, the chart also shows the same color coding. Total import of textiles clothing, including fibers, accounts for more than half of the garment export, which indicates that Myanmar is highly dependent on imports of raw materials. And interestingly enough, among Myanmar's garment exporters, large factories are either fully foreign-owned or operating through joint venture agreements between local and foreign companies, and most of which are based in mainland China, Hong Kong, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. In 2018, European countries accounted for over 45% of total garment exports from Myanmar. And we can surely see that the main reason is the generalized system of preference, which grants the duty-free exports to Europe. Foreign, local, and joint venture garment factories in Myanmar. So there are three different types of factories categorized in Myanmar. So out of the total 533 garment manufacturers in Myanmar, 355 are estimated to be foreign-owned. So in this case, the manufacturing factories are foreign-owned. That's the reason the free-on-board orders are handled in their head office while sourcing CMP, cut, make, pack orders to Myanmar for standardized manufacturing. 148 are local factories rely primarily on the CMP order only. And lastly, joint venture companies, that's about 30 factories. Most joint venture work and source orders from their respective parent head office. But in Myanmar, CMP is more focused to work for those joint venture companies who sourced orders from their respective parent head office. This slide shows number of factories by size and investment type. The first graph shows foreign-owned. Foreign-owned companies, as you can see, top 7, top 27, if we can combine those are 34%. 34% of the factories employee more than 1,000 people. So they are leading factories and large-sized factories. But compared to foreign-owned, if you see the third graph, that's the Myanmar-owned. It has over 70% of factories are small-sized factories, meaning that they hire less than 500 people for their factories. So far, I have covered the overview of the fashion industry and manufacturing in Myanmar. It really plays an important role to bring great outcomes for the bright future of the economy of Myanmar. In order to create more revenues, the main focus should be adding more values. It means the transition from CMP production to FOB production by not foreign-owned factories, but Myanmar-owned factories. In order to do so, fashion education should be the main focus. So I'm going to talk about Myanmar fashion education, especially what is the current status right now. I try to categorize Myanmar fashion education into two categories. The first is Myanmar fashion education in a public sector. There are two schools included in this category. The first one is the School of Fashion Technology. It's under GTI, Government Technical Institute. The Ministry of Education approved the School of Fashion Technology, which was set to open under the Government Technical Institute, GTI. The 120-year-old Government Technical Institute, which is located in Insane Township, Yangon region, was scheduled to reopen its doors to teach technical and vocational subjects with the support of the German government. During the time when I was in Myanmar, that's from December of 2018 to March of 2019, I tried to visit the school, but it was not available at that time. So my understanding was even though the Ministry of Education approved the school was not actually running at that time. So I'm not sure what is going on with the school right now. So if anybody participated in this conference know more about the school's current status, if you can keep us updated, especially keep me posted, I would appreciate that. The second school is the Yangon Technological Education School. It is the only institution of higher education in Myanmar, focusing on textile sciences and engineering. The university provides a textile engineering major, and the school's goal is to provide training in basic mechanical engineering subjects and train future leaders in textiles and other related industries, which involves research and engineering principles. The school currently provides 6 years of undergraduate programming, as well as master's and PhD programs. So what I found out so far is that there is no fashion-focused schools in Myanmar. So what I mean by fashion-focused is fashion design and fashion manufacturing. The second categorization is Myanmar fashion education in a private sector. So Yangu's Fashion Academy is an example. So Yangu's is a private label brand in Myanmar. Their main focus is selling accessories such as tourist items or fashion accessories such as bags, handbags, and other items. So Yangu's started Fashion Academy at their company's main office, and they want to be socially responsible so that they want to provide these opportunities to anyone who wants to learn fashion and want to become a leader in the fashion industry. Lastly, but not leastly, I want to talk about fashion business in Myanmar. Basically, I want to provide some examples of fashion retailers in Myanmar so that you have a good idea of what is going on and also how it can grow to become an important economic sector in the industry. There are so many exciting things happening in retail business in Myanmar. One of the exciting things is changes of a retail climate. And one good example is global supermarket chain Macro is coming in Myanmar. And exciting thing is most of the supermarket chain, if they are big enough, they also carries a lot of fashion items. So it will add a lot of interesting things to Myanmar fashion industry. There are malls selling fashion products. Let me just show you some exemplar malls, which are all individual malls located in the city of Yangon. Junction City, located in Yangon, is a great example. Junction Square is a smaller than Junction City, but is another wonderful example of selling clothing and fashion items. Surely Myanmar Plaza. They carry a lot of great private label brands of fashion, So you can definitely see a lot of great exemplar brands at Myanmar Plaza. Douyin Center is a fashion hub in Yangon City. You can go there and you can buy lower price range to a little bit higher price range, different product categories for different demographics. There are other retailers, and I want to give you some examples what I mean by other retailers. Sengia is the first example. Sengia is a superstore. They carry not only grocery items but also variety of other items. They have online and offline presence in Myanmar. The second example is Ga Mon Point. This is a Burmese conglomerate, and they own a lot of retail stores. Their mission is developing quality products as well as services. Their business is healthcare, hospitality, real estate, but they also carry brands, and their focus is retailing. They own a lot of retail stores in Myanmar. Really exciting thing is there are homegrown Myanmar brands. What I mean by Myanmar brands here is in terms of fashion brands. And I put a title, private label. So let me briefly talk about what private label means. It means the designs are coming from their company and productions are done by the company, even though they can hire some manufacturers can manufacture it for them, but everything is based on their design and their specification of their designs. So there are really interesting Myanmar brands. They create their design and they execute it and they set it under their designer brand name. So let me show you some examples. Young-Goose is a great example in this category, private label brand. So Young-Goose have their own design team. They got their inspiration from unique Myanmar traditional paintings and also colors, and they design it for their market and they execute it and they set it under the brand name Young-Goose. Jaeil is another example. So this is a modified longi style traditional garment of Myanmar. Stella Collections is another example of a private label brand in Myanmar. Stella Collections designed for women who want to wear modern and sophisticated styles in Myanmar. There are online retailers in Myanmar. Since the pandemic started, there has been a strong demand toward online retailers globally. And one example of online retailer in Myanmar is shop.com. Let me briefly talk about shop.com and show the screenshot of the company's website. Shop.com is an online retailer in Myanmar. The products they carry started from electronic devices, but it includes home and lifestyle, style-related items, and women's fashion, men's fashion, children's fashion, sports, outdoor, and other kinds of fashion items. It's like Amazon, and there is a strong potential of this company can grow. Let me summarize my presentation before we move to the next presenter. In my presentation, I covered the overview of Myanmar fashion industry, including manufacturing, Myanmar fashion education in public and private sectors, and Myanmar fashion business, including fashion retailers. To make it short, there is a bright future of Myanmar fashion industry and fashion business. In order to fulfill the bright future, it is necessary to provide appropriate fashion education to train future leaders of the industry and the business. It requires to have a collaborative effort and partnership with the Myanmar government and the Myanmar fashion industry together. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Byung-ho Ellie Jin. I'm Albert Myers Distinguished Professor at the Department of Textile and Apparel Technology and Management at North Carolina State University in the United States. The topic I'm going to talk about today is the apparel industry development in a nation and how we can prepare for that. I want to begin with economic development patterns in a nation. So this two charts shows the flying geese model by Japanese scholars. According to the model, in a particular country, the economic development starts with the textiles industry, and then chemicals, iron, steel, and automobiles and electronic goods follows the development. So this process is exactly Korea followed. Korea began its industrial development in apparel production, and then chemical industry developed after that, and iron and steel, and automobiles, which is Hyundai and Kia and Daewoo, and then electronic goods after that, which is Samsung and LG. If you look at textile industry in particular, Japanese studied apparel and textile industry in the 50s, right after the World War II, and then NIEs, which includes Korea, Taiwan, and Hong Kong, follow the textile and apparel industry development, and then ASEAN countries, and then China, and then Vietnam and India. So this was done pretty early, so there's no Asian countries, Southeast Asian countries after that, but there are many Asian countries like Myanmar develops their economic development in textile and apparel industries. And then in a nation, apparel industry develops in this order. It began with CMT, cut, make, and trim. Sometimes we call it as assembly. After that, we go into OEM, which is original equipment manufacturing. We also call it as full factory or FOV production. After that, ODM happened, which is original design manufacturing. And then OBM, which is original brand manufacturing, happened. So CMT, OEM, ODM, OBM, each country follows in this order in their apparel industry development. Let's briefly review what OBM, ODM, and OEM means. Under the OEM production, apparel companies only manufacture for clients utilizing client design and client brand name. ODM is the same as OEM except that the company designs working with the client. But it is same as OEM in that it manufactures for its client utilizing client's brand name. Under the OBM stage, companies develop their own brand, they design their own products, and they distribute their products throughout their distribution network. So now many Southeast Asian countries belong to this OEM production stage, and United States, Korea, and other economically developed countries now on the OBM status. The main thing here is that the profit increases as companies reaches OBM status, but the risk is also high at the OBM status. So in terms of profit, OEM is the lowest, and then OBM is the highest. Most global luxury brands have started as a small family business, typically in textiles or OEM production. It is not just Asian countries following OEM, ODM, and OBM status. And other well-known luxury brands like Jaeil and Taz, both are Italian brands, they also follow the same process. For example, Jaeil, it was a wool textile production. They are wool textile producers at the beginning. And then they put Jaeil, their family last name, Jaeil on the edge of their textiles. So they branded Jaeil. And then they started apparel production, and they developed the Jaeil brand, and then internationalized their brand, and they expanded their brand into other categories like a perfume and shoes and accessories, sunglasses, like that. Tarte, another Italian brand, another Italian shoes brand, started at footwear workshop, small workshop, not even a factory, small workshop, and then shoe factory, and then they branded their products as Della Bell, which is their street address, I guess, and then they did brand name, OBM production, and OEM at the same time. They produced shoes for Prada at that time. And then they developed the brand name Tarte, and then they internationalized Tarte brand throughout the world. And then they began brand extension, like putting Tarte's name in perfume, eyeglasses, and handbags, and even apparel goods, like that. So this is very typical process apparel industry or apparel companies got through. It's not just the Asian manufacturers. Almost every apparel companies get through the same process. Now you see that there are many Asian apparel brands actively internationalizing their brands, like Japanese Muji, Hong Kong Giordano, Japanese Uniqlo, and Hong Kong Bossini. So they established the companies in the 70s and 80s, but those countries involved in apparel production only, like Japan in 50s and Hong Kong 60s and 70s, and then after that they developed their own brand, and then they expanded to the global market. This is a very typical pattern. And then let's talk about why apparel companies want to evolve into ODM or OBM. The answer is very simple, because the profit increases as the apparel industry evolves into ODM and OBM stages. So this is not apparel example, but this is very clearly shows that how the margins grows as the company has their own brand name. So this is electronic goods area, but Honhai, that Chinese manufacturer, contract manufacturer, like OEM manufacturer, their gross margin is roughly 7%. And then Huawei, that's a global B2B company, their global margin is 40%. And then global apparel branded companies like Apple and Procter & Gamble, their margin is like 41% and 51%. But after deducting all the expenses like R&D and sales and administrative expenses, the operating margin is only 2% for OEM producers like Honhai. But the Huawei, even though their gross margin was 40%, after deducting R&D costs and other expenses, their operating margin is only 14%. But in case of Apple, the operation margin is 31%, which is the highest. It's higher than Procter & Gamble, which is 19%. But this chart shows very clearly that when you have your own brand name, okay, like Apple and Procter & Gamble, the operation margin is a lot higher than OEM producers and ODM producers. So that's why many companies want to have their own brand name, because the profit is high. Then how we want to do that? How can we develop ODM and OBM products? It requires different sets of skills, especially OBM requires design and consumer insight, marketing and branding, and distribution, services, and innovations. According to Global Commodity Chain, GCC model, OEM producers learn by participating in the global commodity chain. So I will explain it more on next slide. There are other sources of learning, meaning that to be able to ODM and OBM producers, there should be learning. Global commodity chain refers to the whole range of activities involved in the design, production, and marketing of a product. It basically began with the entire supply chain from the beginning, like design, production, and marketing, the whole range of activities that companies are involved in. But this GCC framework is very useful to explain why and how apparel commodity chains in the East Asian countries like South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong upgrade from simple assembly to full package supply, which is OEM, and then to OBM production. According to this framework, such industrial upgrade involves organizational learning gained through participation in GCC, meaning that apparel firms in East Asian countries were able to improve themselves by establishing close linkages with the various lead firms, like big buyers, big US and European buyers, such as Calvin Klein and Target. And then because they give OEM producers their design, then they teach how to produce and how to source raw materials, and even assist the technical development. So by participating in GCC, OEM producers learn design, they develop taste of apparel goods that is sold in economically developed countries. And also they learn how those US buyers coordinate the global production networks by just participating the GCC networking. So participating in GCC is very critical as an OEM producer to upgrade to the next level. This chart shows the apparel industry development in Korea and in India by Toy and et al.'s 6 stages. So the 6 stages include embryonic, early export of apparel, more advanced production and fabric apparel, and then golden stage, and then full maturity, and significant decline stage. And then this chart shows when Korea and India got through those stages. In the 50s, Korea was embryonic stage. So they produced simple fabrics and garments made from natural fibers for domestic consumption and imported fiber, fabric, and apparel. But in the 60s, they are more actively involved in export of low-end, mature varieties and native apparel, and apparel requiring elaborate handwork, like hand knitting sweaters, like that. But in the 70s, Korea is more actively involved in exporting. So their export increased by 13 times during the 70s and accounting for about 40% of Korea's total export in 1971. In the 80s, Korea was in golden stage. The trade surplus increases, and then textile companies established factories in Central America to export to the US market. So in the 70s, basically, Korea involved in OEM production. But India's case, OEM happened in 80s and 90s. So after these OEM stages, they move on to OBM status. Let me show you next slide when it happened. So this is from my paper published in CTRJ, which is major academic journal in our field. So look at the chart. The first chart shows the Korea, and the second bottom part of the figure shows India's case. In Korea, in the 80s, at that time, Korea was a golden stage, and then there are many trade surplus happened. So at that time, Korea developed national brand. It was a golden stage. The same pattern happened in India. So before golden stage, all the export and more advanced stages, they were participating in OEM or CMT and OEM production. But after that, they developed their own brand, which is OBM production. And ODM is between OEM and OBM production in the 70s. But there are some companies still doing ODM only, but there are many factories doing ODM or OBM together. But here, important thing is that OBM, their own company's own brand development happens after OEM production in case of Korea and India. So apparel brand development in Korea happened in the golden stage, which is the 1980s. In terms of demand, there are huge growing middle-income consumers. So the consumer demand for branded apparel goods increased, and then more sophisticated tastes developed for apparel goods. In case of India, the growing middle-income consumers happened in the 2000s. And then at that time, India also developed their own brand names. In terms of supply side, OEM manufacturers were able to cultivate the knowledge needed for developing an apparel brand through OEM production experience and international brand launched in the market earlier. But the Korean OEM manufacturers lost its price competitiveness, which made them to turn to domestic market. So they made huge money by exporting their goods to overseas market, but they lost their price competitiveness because their labor costs increases. So they couldn't export more volumes than they did. So utilizing their production volumes, so they turned to domestic market and developed their own brand name, utilizing their learning by participating in GCC. So many Korean brands were developed by OEM manufacturers. However, brand emergent timing in Korea and India and Bangladesh are a little bit different. In case of Korea and India, international brand entered the market first, and then national brand developed, and then private brand happened after that. The private brand here is that the store developed their own brand. Like Walmart developed their own brand, and Target developed their own brand, something like that. But in case of Bangladesh, national brand development happened very early, in early export stage. And then international brand entered in Bangladesh market in more advanced stages, which is opposite of Korea and India. So if you look at this chart again, I added Bangladesh example onto the Korea and India example. So look at the Korea case. All the export, Korea was not able to develop their national brand, but Bangladesh, they developed their own national brand in all the export stage, and the international brand entered later, more advanced stages. So we are curious about how Bangladesh companies develop their own national brand in all the export stages, meaning that their OEM participation was not that active at the time, because it typically happens more advanced in stage or golden age stage. But their national brand was developed in all the export stages without participating in OEM production. When we looked into closely the Bangladesh apparel industry, we learned that national brand development initiated in Bangladesh by entrepreneurs who are not involved in apparel manufacturing and exporting. Without export house experience, national brand owners gained expertise on branding either by working for upscale fashion company abroad, or studied fashion courses abroad or online, or working in fashion houses and other corporate offices in Bangladesh, or following international fashion magazine or social media. So I'm trying to say here is that even though OEM participation of GCC as an OEM producer, they gain knowledge, but nowadays there are many other sources of learning, like working for foreign company, or studying in abroad, or learning from social media or international fashion magazines. But this was not popular, like a fashion magazine or social media was not popular in Korea in the 80s and 90s. So there was less learning through that route in Korea. So suggested branding strategies and required resources for each stage is summarized here. At the beginning, OEM production, financial investment for large volume OEM production is needed, which is in more advanced production of fabric and apparel stage. But in golden stage, since companies develop their own national brand, a skilled workforce that can design, branding, and marketing is needed. But in the significant decline stage, because national brand will be internationalized to other countries, meaning that you're exporting with your own brand. At that time, workforce with a good understanding of global market is needed for internationalization of its national brand. Also, I want to emphasize that skills and knowledge for workforce development in the apparel global value chain is different. In assembly, CMT workers need to know how to operate sewing machines and cutting and pressing equipment. So formal education requirements are very low. So minimal knowledge of reading, writing, and math and aptitude for learning is just needed. But in OEM or full package stage, requires more highly trained workers with the knowledge of the textile industry to fill sourcing functions, while financial logistics specialists are needed for upstream and downstream activities. For ODM and OBM stage, require more advanced skills related to marketing and consumer research. So this chart summarizes what functions needed and then how formal education and training is needed in each stage. So first, CMT and assembly and production stage. As you see that the formal education is not needed because at that time, hand sewers and sewing machine operators and garment pressures, cutting machine operators and line leaders and production flow supervisors are needed. But in OEM and food package stage, companies need to do quality control and sourcing, purchasing, and supply chain management. At that time, high school diploma and technical education is needed. But in ODM production, you need fabric and apparel pattern makers, tailors and dressmakers and custom sewers and designers and senior designers are needed. So at that time, formal education is needed for design, and pattern making. So bachelor's and master's degree might needed for those education, like pattern making and apparel design concept and apparel product development. But OBM stages, you need general business skills and branding and marketing capabilities. So you need to educate bachelor's and master's degree in business, engineering, and apparel so that they can develop their own brand and develop marketing and branding strategies to sell their branded goods by their distribution channels. So the formal education requirement increases as a company goes from CMT, OEM, ODM, and OBM stages. So more education and different kinds of workforces are needed by the companies evolve from CMT to OBM. Thank you for listening, and we'd like to get any questions you may have.
Yeah. Okay. Now that we have finished watching the video, recorded presentations, again, I'm Yoon-Jung Lee, and we would like to take questions from the floor, if there is any. Do we have any questions? If you have any question, please write type on the chat window or unmute. Or unmute your mic and please speak on the mic. There's a question here. Or
or if Dr. Jin or Dr. Lee has any comments to make, any further comments to make, you may also speak to the audience.
Okay, I am Ellie Jin. I'm the third presenter.
소리 좀 켜주시겠어요?
Can you hear me well? Okay. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina, United States. Here it's like a 9:23 evening, 9:23 p.m. And I hope you enjoyed the listening presentation. But even though we say very general overview of economic development, focusing on apparel industry, but
소리 하나도 안 들리는데.
does it, you don't hear me?
I can hear you.
Do you hear me? Do you hear me? No?
I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Our speaker was muted, and I wasn't really able to hear you. So would you please?
Okay, all right. Now is it okay? Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm Ellie Jin. I'm the third presenter of the presentation. And I hope you enjoyed the listening the topic. So while you're emphasizing the economic development, focusing on the apparel industry, from talking CMT, OEM, on ODM, OBM a lot. But that's a very typical pattern, but it doesn't mean that we have to get through the process, but it's a very typical process. But sometimes, like I showed the Bangladesh example, it can be different. So there are many entrepreneurs who just start business without any apparel production experiences. I mean, without participating global supply chain, as we mentioned. So, so there are a lot of different methods we can approach, we can evolve. But I want to emphasize the education, as I said in the last slides. But the young generation's learnings are very different from our generation. We got the formal education to learn and then diplomas like that. But young generations are very creative to learn from social media or even internet, even YouTube. They can learn, they can self-learn about how to create apparel designs and branding, those stuff. So what you need to do is provide that type of environment to our young generations. But we hope to get some questions. Any questions is fine.
Okay, there's a question from the floor here. So.
All right, good. Go ahead. 잘 안 들려. I cannot hear him.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I have a general question about the garment industry in Myanmar. My name is Yoon-Jung Choi. I'm a professor with Kyunghee University, majoring in international trade. So I'm very interested in this topic, especially the global value chain in the garment industry. So I have been interested in this industry in the Myanmar. I have actually general question about the garment industry in Myanmar. Nowadays, the COVID-19 has a serious impact on this industry, especially garment industry. The many labor workers get together and work together. So it is very vulnerable to this kind of the virus or this kind of a pandemic effect. So I think nowadays the pandemic or COVID-19 status in Myanmar is very severe. Daily, I heard that there are more than 1,000 people confirmed in COVID-19. So I think that this pandemic can maybe the expected to continue in next year. So then maybe it lasts for at least 2 years. And then the 2 years is not a small and a short period for the industry. So after ending of this pandemic, and then what is expectation about the garment industry in Myanmar? And also another question is that actually the Myanmar government is interested in the improving or increasing the value added in the garment industry. So at the first time, at the first stage of the opening their industry, they actually they were hesitate to open the garment industry to the world because they only use the low value added industry. So, but nowadays they opened the low skill industry, such as the garment industry. So I think the Myanmar should consider how to improve or how to increase their value added in this garment industry. So do you have any ideas or specific the suggestion of the policy to increase the value added in the garment industry? Thank you.
Yeah, I think for the first question, maybe our second presenter, Dr. Jaeil might be able to answer this question. Do you have any answer for this question, Dr. Jaeil?
Hi, everyone. I am Jaeil. I am not from Hawaii. I'm actually in Seattle, US. My background is Hawaii, so hope you don't be confused about that. So thanks for the question, Dr. Che from Kyung University. So last June, actually 3 of us gave a little presentation to Korean Garment Manufacturers Association in Myanmar. We had the meeting via Zoom, and at that time, we learned what is going on about the manufacturers in Myanmar. So it's more about the Korean manufacturers, but they provide us a great background what is going on during this pandemic. So we don't really talk a lot about after the pandemic, how they deal with workers, but mainly their focus was, their concern actually was, they don't really receive a lot of orders from the retailers. A lot of orders were canceled, so they don't really know what's gonna happen like in the future. They said that their order they received will end by summer, actually by spring. And after the spring of 2021, they don't know whether they're gonna get more orders or what, because a lot of retailers, especially, even I can definitely tell you about the stories in the US, a lot of them really canceled their orders. Even they changed around the colors so they can kind of use the next season's orders for the next season instead of giving them a new order. So it's more like the future of the general retailers, like future, so that whether the manufacturers will get more orders or not. But so that's the first thing. And I can briefly tell you about my experience when I was in Myanmar. So I was a Fulbright scholar, went to Myanmar from 2018 December to 2019 March. And I gave, actually I got a chance to work with the fashion industry, especially small business owners and some of the new retailers, they wanna grow bigger. But the question was, they don't have actually fashion education in the system in Myanmar right now. So even when Young Goods started their first kickoff seminar meeting of their Yangus Fashion Academy. I was able to talk to at their first meeting. There were a lot of young people want to start their own business. I'm talking about in terms of fashion. And also they want to learn about fashion, but there's no route. I mean, there's no ways they can learn, even the pattern making skills. They want to learn more about that, but there's no schools provide that education. So I can surely see that there are bright futures, want to learn more and want to grow this fashion industry. But definitely, as Dr. Jin mentioned, education should be the key.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Jae Lee, for your answer. And probably for the second question, Dr. Jin can answer that question. Would you please?
Yes. As I mentioned at the last part of my presentation, to move to the ODM and OBM, which is value-added, production, definitely we need education, as Dr. Jae Lee emphasized. I mean, the education here, meaning it can be just pattern making at the institution level, not degree level, but it can be also offered at the degree, as a degree at the university level or even two-year college level. I will give you some example. When I attended college in the 80s, at that time, there's no branding concept was taught when I got my bachelor's degree, undergraduate degree in Korea. But at that time, the merchandising and branding concept was taught in the United States. But now that's my research area. So you see, the 80s we haven't taught the brand management and brand development concept because the concept was not popular concept. But in the 2008, I was invited to Beijing Institute of Technology, which is a major fashion school in China. I was invited to teach their teachers, about what is merchandising, what is fashion retailing, what is branding, you see? So China at that time, it's 2008. At that time, they want to develop brand education, you see? Another example is that the Vietnam, when I first visited in Vietnam in 2009, there was no, I wanted to talk to professors in fashion program, but there's no fashion program at all, nothing. They were just focusing on the production and OEM productions, no branding concept, no apparel pattern making skills or apparel design skills are taught at the university level. But now they do have, it's emerging. I believe there are 2 or 3 schools offering fashion design and fashion pattern making skills. So what does this tell? You see the patterns a little bit. I'm not saying that you have to follow the same pattern, but next step is definitely teach apparel design and pattern making concepts at the university level. But nowadays, there are many good technologies and softwares available. At the time when I was in college in the 80s, we learned it by hand, right? By drawing the apparel patterns by hand, or by the rulers like that. But now there are many good softwares like CAD systems and even PLM systems. There are many good softwares available, and then factories utilize those, softwares. So without those, we cannot provide proper education for students. So this needs some sort of investment. So I hope the government can think about investing that type of technologies and softwares for formal education. But it applies to Myanmar and also Cambodia as well, because if you want to move to the formal education, we want to invest that type of softwares and technologies and professors who can teach those courses well.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Jin, for your answer. And if there's any further question from the floor, I would like to take one last question, maybe.
There's a question in the chat box.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
chat box. Okay, how many do? Can I? Okay. Okay. Well, in the chat box, there's a question. I would like to hear your opinion on future prospects of apparel industries between Korea, India versus Korea, Bangladesh. Thank you. Okay, Dr. Jin, would you answer this question then?
Actually, I didn't quite get the question. I think I think the professor meant that there's some differences between Korea, India, and Bangladesh. So he want to hear the differences, I guess. Did I interpret it correct? Is Professor Wan Yan here? Okay, then I will just talk about, yes, good, all right, good. So the major reason is that in Bangladesh, people still wear traditional attire, traditional costume. I mean, not adapting Western attire like our jacket and blouses and pants and skirts. So that's why international brand didn't enter. They are very slow entering the market. Instead, their local entrepreneurs are pretty active in developing brands, their own brands, and selling to their domestic market. But India, there are many foreign brands entering the market, which is pretty similar to Korea because international brands enter Korea and India before their own brand was developed, which is pretty similar. So what I'm guessing is that India also saying India need to educate people, I mean the students, to the next level, the brand development level. But luckily, in India there's what is it? The Fashion Institute of Technology, not FIT, what is it? India Institute of Technology, right? Yeah. So there are that type of technology. The program is widely available in different, the parts of India. So that is a pretty good investment. And then I think there are very brilliant young students in India, and also they are coming to the United States to get a further, higher education. So that I think is very important direction.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Jin. And I think we are running out of time. And so I would like to conclude this session. I just wanted to emphasize that we've seen a bright future in Myanmar, both as a part of the global value chain and also as a market in itself. And we wanted to suggest the needs for some educational program that can help the Myanmar people or the workforce to be developed in a higher level. So I think we did a proper job of opening up the discussion today. And if there is any further question or comments you would like to make to us, then please contact us through email or through this conference, and we would be more than welcome to talk further with you. Thank you very much for your participation, and thank you for listening.